candles flickered on a birthday cake in a small apartment in Kissimmee, Florida. It was February 25th, 2024, and the living room was packed with the kind of chaos that only a 13-year-old's birthday party can generate. Plastic cups sweated condensation onto the coffee table. Streamers hung from the ceiling in loops of purple and pink. The air smelled like pizza grease and vanilla frosting, and someone had cranked the music loud enough that neighbors probably heard the bass through the walls. Madeline Soto stood in the center of it all, her face lit by candle glow, surrounded by friends who screamed the birthday song off-key and family members who snapped photos on phones they would later wish they could delete. She was grinning, eyes squeezed shut as she made a wish nobody would ever know. In that moment, she looked exactly like what she was, a kid on the edge of teenagerhood, caught between childhood and whatever came next, happy to be the center of attention for one night. Friends crowded around her. Relatives passed plates. Someone spilled soda on the carpet and laughed it off. It was one of those ordinary, beautiful moments that only becomes unbearable to remember when you know what comes after. In every photo from that night, Madeline is smiling. Her hair is pulled back. She is wearing a casual outfit, the kind of thing a middle schooler picks because it feels right, not because it matches. She looks like any other 13-year-old in America, celebrating a milestone birthday with people who loved her. But there is one person in those photos who does not belong in this story the way a guest or a family friend might. Moving through the kitchen, leaning against the counter, present in the background of several pictures, was a 37-year-old man named Stephan Sterns. He was her mother's boyfriend. He had been living with them for years, having started dating Jennifer when Madeline was around 8 or 9 years old. He had been given keys, trusted with errands, allowed into the rhythms of their daily life. To most of the guests that night, he was just Jennifer's boyfriend, a quiet guy who seemed helpful, maybe a little awkward but harmless enough. What nobody at that party knew, what even Madeline's own mother would later claim she did not fully understand, was that Stephan had been documenting his abuse of Madeline for years. On his phone, hidden behind factory resets and deleted files, were more than 1,500 images and videos showing the essay of a child. That child was the girl blowing out candles in front of him, and in less than 24 hours she would be dead. According to later court testimony and police records, Madeline ended her 13th birthday not in her own bed, but in Stephan's. Her mother, Jennifer Soto, would tell investigators that she had sent her daughter to sleep in his room while she stayed elsewhere in the apartment. It was an arrangement that had become routine in that household, a decision Jennifer later tried to justify by saying she trusted Stephan, that he treated Madeline like his own daughter, that she never believed he would hurt her. By the next morning, Madeline would be missing. 4 days after that, her body would be found in a wooded area off a rural road in Osceola County, partially concealed by brush and dry grass. And the man who had smiled in the background of her birthday photos, who had been trusted with her safety, who had shared a bed with her that final night, would become the most hated name in Central Florida. This is the story of the Stephan Sterns case. It is the story of a girl who should still be alive, of a system of trust that collapsed from the inside, of a digital trail so comprehensive and so horrifying that when investigators finally uncovered it, there was nowhere left for him to hide. It is a story about how evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it sits at the kitchen table. Sometimes it drives you to school. Sometimes it looks like someone you are supposed to trust. The morning of February 26, 2024, began like so many others in the Soto household. At least, that is what Jennifer would later tell police. Madeline was supposed to go back to school at Hunters Creek Middle, just another Monday in Orange County, another week of homework and friends and the small dramas that define a 13-year-old's life. Her birthday was over. The decorations were still up. There were probably leftover slices of cake in the fridge. Jennifer Soto worked nights. She had a job that kept her out of the house during evening hours, which meant that Stephan, her live-in boyfriend, often handled the morning routine. He would wake Madeline up, make sure she got dressed, grab her backpack, and drive her to school. It was a system that had been in place for months, maybe longer. Jennifer trusted him. She believed he cared about Madeline. She had convinced herself that the man she was dating, though only about 2 years older than her, was responsible and safe. On the morning of February 26th, Jennifer told police Stephan handled everything. She was tired. She needed rest. Stephan assured her he would get Madeline to school on time. So Jennifer stayed in her room, and Stephan and Madeline left the apartment together sometime around 8 in the morning. According to the story Stephan would later tell detectives, he drove Madeline toward Hunters Creek Middle School in his parents' silver Honda. He said he dropped her off near the school at approximately 8:30, close enough that she could walk the rest of the way. He claimed he watched her get out of the car, backpack on her shoulders, and head toward campus. Then he drove away. He said he ran some errands after that, stopped by a smoke shop, dealt with a flat tire on US 192, maybe looked into a game card shop because there was a new trading card release he was interested in. It was a normal morning, he would insist. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. For several hours, nobody had any reason to doubt him. Madeline was supposed to be in class. Jennifer was resting. Stephan was going about his day. The world continued to spin as if nothing had changed. But by mid-afternoon, when Jennifer made the familiar drive to pick her daughter up from school, everything came crashing down. She expected to see Madeline waiting by the curb, maybe scrolling through her phone, maybe talking to a friend. Instead, school staff told her something that made her stomach drop. Madeline had never shown up that day. Attendance records were clear. No one had seen her. She had not walked through the front doors. She had not been in any of her classes. According to every piece of documentation the school had, Madeline Soto had simply never arrived. Jennifer's confusion turned to panic. She called Stephan. She called friends. She checked Madeline's social media, hoping maybe the girl had skipped school and gone somewhere with friends, even though that would have been wildly out of character. Madeline was not a rebellious kid. She did not have a history of running away. She had anxiety. She was cautious. The idea of her just vanishing between home and school made no sense. By late afternoon, the missing person report was filed with the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Madeline's face appeared on local news stations. Her picture spread across social media. Neighbors and strangers began sharing her information, hoping someone had seen something. And as the hours ticked by, the search for a 13-year-old girl who should have been in math class became one of the most intensive missing person investigations Central Florida had seen in years. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Orange County Sheriff's Office, recognizing the urgency of a missing child case, mobilized more than 100 personnel within the first 24 hours. Deputies, detectives, K-9 units, and specialized search teams fanned out across the area. Bloodhounds were brought in to track Madeline's scent from the apartment complex where she lived. Aerial searches were organized. Dive teams checked retention ponds. Volunteers combed through wooded areas and abandoned lots. Every park, every empty building, every place a scared teenager might hide or a predator might stash a body was on the list. The community responded with the kind of desperate hope that always accompanies these searches. Flyers were printed and taped to telephone poles. Local businesses put Madeline's picture in their windows. Parents hugged their own kids a little tighter and tried not to think about what it would feel like to lose them. People who had never met the Soto family found themselves refreshing news sites every few minutes, hopping for an update, praying for good news. But behind the scenes, investigators were already noticing things that did not add up. The first red flag was Madeline's backpack and laptop. On the very day she disappeared, deputies found both items discarded in a dumpster at the apartment complex where she lived with her mother and Stephan. For a girl who was supposedly on her way to school, there was no logical reason for her school supplies to end up in the trash. Kids who run away usually take their phones, their laptops, the tools that keep them connected to their world. Kids who are taken do not get the chance to throw their belongings away first. To detectives, The dumpster discovery screamed staging. Someone was trying to make it look like Madeline had left for school and vanished along the way, when in reality, something had happened much closer to home. The second red flag came from surveillance footage. Detectives pulled every available camera angle they could find: traffic cams, business security footage, residential doorbell cameras. They mapped out the route Stephan claimed to have taken from the apartment to Hunters Creek Middle School. If his story was accurate, his car should have appeared on at least some of those cameras during the right time frame. It did not. Instead, investigators began noticing his vehicle in completely different areas, far from the school, traveling in directions that made no sense if he was simply dropping off a kid and running errands. One particularly troubling piece of footage came from the apartment complex itself. Surveillance video captured Stephan pulling up to the trash compactor early that morning and throwing away several bags. The timestamp was around 7:45. Detectives who reviewed the footage noted something chilling. Through the windshield of the car, they could see what appeared to be a person slumped over in the front passenger seat. The figure was motionless, head tilted at an unnatural angle, mouth hanging open. Based on what investigators could observe, it looked like a lifeless body. When deputies searched the compactor, they found Madeline's laptop, her backpack, and a trash bag containing one of her shoes. Stephan had told them he dropped her off at school with her belongings. The footage suggested he had thrown those belongings away while she was already dead in his car. The third red flag emerged during interviews. Detectives brought Stephan in for questioning multiple times during the early days of the search. Each time, they asked him to walk through his timeline for the morning of February 26th, and each time, his story shifted just slightly. First, he said he dropped Madeline off at 8:30. Then he said it might have been closer to 8:40. He claimed he went to a smoke shop that was supposed to open at 10, but surveillance footage showed him already driving on John Young Parkway at that time. When detectives pressed him on the discrepancies, he blamed his ADHD, said time was not his strong suit, insisted he was doing his best to remember. But the detectives were not buying it. In audio recordings released months later, you can hear the frustration in their voices as they try to pin down where he was between 8:40 and 10 in the morning. Over an hour of unaccounted time. Over an hour when his car was nowhere near the school. Over an hour when Madeline's body was, according to later evidence, already in his vehicle. "Can you help me explain to my supervisors why there's such a delay in the time?" one detective asked him. "No, I can't explain it," Stephan replied. "I wasn't going anywhere in particular. I wasn't doing anything in particular." "Do you have problems with your memory that you can't recall what you did?" the detective pressed. "Yes, I'm extremely ADHD, I'm sorry. Details start to get fuzzy after a while." It was a performance, investigators believed, an attempt to play confused, forgetful, harmless, but the evidence was already telling a different story, and it was about to get much, much worse. On February 28th, just 2 days after Madeline was reported missing, Stephan made a decision that he likely believed would make him look cooperative and innocent. He voluntarily turned his cell phone over to law enforcement. It is a move many suspects make when they think they have successfully covered their tracks. Hand over the device, let the cops poke around, prove you have nothing to hide. Except digital forensics experts are very, very good at finding things people think they have deleted. When investigators first examined Stephan's phone, they immediately noticed that it had been subjected to a factory reset. The device had been wiped clean recently, likely within the last few days. For detectives working a missing child case, that kind of digital scrubbing is an enormous red flag. Why would someone factory reset their phone in the middle of a search for a girl they claim to care about? What could possibly be on that device that was worth destroying in the midst of an active investigation? But a factory reset is not a magic eraser. Data does not simply vanish into the ether. With the right tools and enough time, forensic analysts can recover files that were supposedly deleted, especially if those files were backed up to cloud storage or synced across devices. And that is exactly what happened with Stephan's phone. Over the course of weeks, digital forensics experts working for the Orange County Sheriff's Office and later the Kissimmee Police Department were able to recover more than 1,500 images and videos from Stephan's phone and associated accounts. What they found was not just incriminating. It was absolutely devastating. The recovered files included extensive child essay material. The victim in those images and videos was identified as Madeline Soto. The abuse documented on that phone went back years, with arrest affidavits indicating that if the victim was indeed Madeline, she would have been as young as 8 years old when some of the alleged crimes began, though most investigators agree the most extensive documentation dates to when she was around 11 in 2022. Investigators found evidence that Stephan had not only been abusing her, but had been meticulously documenting that abuse, storing it on his phone, uploading it to Google Drive, treating the exploitation of a child as if it were a personal collection to be archived and revisited. The backgrounds in many of the images matched rooms inside the apartment Stephan shared with Jennifer and Madeline. Detectives recognized the bedding, the furniture, the walls. This was not some distant crime committed by a stranger in another state. This was happening inside Madeline's own home, in spaces where she should have felt safe, perpetrated by a man her mother trusted. On March 11, 2024, the Osceola County State Attorney's Office filed 60 new criminal charges against Stephan Sterns. 8 counts of sexual battery of a child under 12 years old. 5 counts of sexual battery involving a child aged 12 to 18 under familial or custodial authority, 7 counts of lewd or lascivious molestation, and 40 counts of unlawful possession of materials depicting sexual performance by a child with 10 or more images. Each count carried the potential for decades in prison. Combined, they represented a legal reckoning that would have put Stephan behind bars for the rest of his life, even without the murder charge. But by that point, the murder charge was coming. Because while digital forensics worked on the phone, search teams had found Madeline's body. On March 1, 2024, 4 days after Madeline was first reported missing, the search shifted from rescue to recovery. A little after 4:30 in the afternoon, deputies searching a rural area off Old Hickory Tree Road in Osceola County, near St. Cloud, found a body in a wooded area about 100 feet from the road. The remains were partially concealed by brush and covered with pieces of hay or dry grass. The victim was wearing a green hooded sweatshirt and blue jeans, clothing consistent with what Madeline had been wearing the last time anyone claimed to see her alive. Officers who approached the scene immediately noticed signs of decomposition. Insect activity was visible around the mouth, left eye, ears, and right hand. The body had been there for days, exposed to the elements and wildlife. It was a grim, brutal end for a girl who had been celebrating her birthday less than a week earlier. Medical examiners arrived. The scene was secured. Investigators photographed every inch of the area, documenting the position of the body, the surrounding vegetation, any potential evidence nearby. And then came the confirmation that everyone had been dreading. The remains belonged to Madeline Soto. She was not missing. She was not hiding. She was dead. Had been dead, most likely, since the morning Stephan claimed to have dropped her off at school. One detail stood out to the investigators processing the scene. Despite the fact that Madeline's body was found in a wooded, muddy area, her socks appeared relatively clean. It was a small thing, but significant. It suggested she had not walked to that location herself. Someone had carried her. Someone had placed her there. And based on the mounting evidence, the most likely candidate was the man who had been seen on surveillance footage moving what appeared to be a limp body into the trunk of his car. Months later, when investigative files were unsealed, the medical examiner's findings were made public. Madeline's cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation, specifically strangulation. The manner of death was classified as homicide. By that point, Stephan had already been named the prime suspect, already been sitting in jail on the sex abuse charges. But the murder charge made it official. He was not just a predator, he was a killer. In October 2024, nearly 8 months after Madeline's death, newly released documents and video analysis revealed just how thoroughly surveillance cameras had documented Stephan's movements on the morning of February 26th. What investigators had pieced together was a timeline so damning, so complete, that it left almost no room for doubt about what had happened. The footage began at the apartment complex. Cameras captured Stephan's silver Honda pulling up to the trash compactor at approximately 7:45 in the morning. He got out of the car, walked to the compactor, and threw in several bags. Through the windshield, investigators noted the figure slumped in the front passenger seat. The person appeared completely lifeless, head tilted back, mouth open. Detectives who reviewed the footage believed they were looking at Madeline's body, already deceased or dying. From there, traffic cameras tracked the Honda traveling south, away from Hunters Creek Middle School. At 8:19 in the morning, around the time Stephan would later claim he was dropping Madeline off for class, his car was spotted pulling into a parking garage near the Holiday Inn Club Vacations Resort. What happened next was captured on garage security cameras, and it was chilling. The footage shows Stephan getting out of the car, walking around to the front passenger side and opening the door. He reaches in and then, according to investigative reports and analysis by legal experts reviewing the case, he lifts what appears to be a limp body out of the seat. He carries the figure, which looks small and lifeless in his arms, to the back of the vehicle. He opens the trunk. He places the body inside. Then he closes the trunk, gets back in the driver's seat, and leaves the garage. From there, more traffic cameras picked up his car heading toward rural Osceola County, the same general area where Madeline's body would eventually be found. At one point, surveillance footage shows his car pulled over on the side of the road, trunk open, Stephan moving around the back of the vehicle. A witness who drove by that morning later told police they had seen a man who looked like he was dealing with a flat tire. Investigators believe that was the moment he disposed of Madeline's body in the woods off Old Hickory Tree Road. After that, cameras captured him driving back toward the apartment complex. He arrived home. He changed clothes. When Jennifer got up later that day and asked where Madeline was, he told her the same lie he would tell police, that he had dropped her off at school and everything had been fine. The surveillance footage obliterated his alibi. There was no school drop-off. There was no normal morning. From the moment he left the apartment with Madeline until the moment he came back alone, every camera that caught him told the same story. He was not a worried boyfriend helping to search for a missing girl. He was a killer trying to cover his tracks. As the investigation deepened, detectives began to focus not just on what Stephan had done, but on how he had been able to do it for so long. And that meant taking a hard look at the household dynamics inside the apartment where Madeline had lived with her mother and the man who murdered her. What they uncovered was deeply disturbing, not just because of Stephan's crimes, but because of the environment that had allowed those crimes to continue unchecked. At the center of that environment was a single, horrifying fact. Jennifer Soto had allowed, and at times actively encouraged, her 13-year-old daughter to sleep in the same bed as her adult boyfriend. In interviews with detectives conducted in the hours and days after Madeline's disappearance, Jennifer admitted to the sleeping arrangements. She described a household where Stephan had become so integrated into their daily lives that the boundaries between parent, partner, and child had blurred in dangerous ways. She told police that on the night of February 25th, Madeline's birthday, she had sent her daughter to sleep in Stephan's room so that she herself could get better rest in another part of the apartment. Jennifer tried to justify the arrangement. She said Stephan treated Madeline like his own daughter. She said she trusted him. She said she never saw any signs that he was hurting her. But investigators also uncovered statements that suggested Jennifer had, at the very least, some awareness that the situation was inappropriate. In one particularly damning piece of testimony, Jennifer told detectives about a fear she had once voiced to a friend. She said she had worried about ending up in a Woody Allen situation, a reference to the filmmaker's infamous history of crossing boundaries with his partner's adopted daughter. It was a fear that acknowledged, on some level, that the relationship between Stephan and Madeline could become something deeply wrong. And yet, despite that fear, Jennifer continued to allow them to share a bed. Detectives also spoke with one of Stephan's ex-girlfriends, who provided additional context about his behaviors. She told police that during their relationship, Stephan had insisted he could only fall asleep if he was cuddling someone. She described it as a need, something he could not do without. Even more disturbingly, she recounted how Stephan had disclosed to Jennifer about waking up one morning with an erection while lying next to a child, presumably Madeline. He had framed it as an embarrassing accident, something involuntary that he felt bad about, but he had told Jennifer about it, and Jennifer had not removed her daughter from that situation. To an outside observer, these are glaring, screaming red flags. An adult man insisting on physical closeness with a child. An adult man disclosing inappropriate physical responses to that closeness. A mother who hears those disclosures and does not immediately put an end to the sleeping arrangements. But inside the dynamics of that household, those red flags were rationalized, minimized, folded into a narrative that allowed everyone to keep pretending everything was fine. Jennifer has not been charged with any crime related to Madeline's death or abuse. Legally, she is not considered complicit in Stephan's actions, but in the court of public opinion, her decisions have been dissected and debated endlessly. How could a mother allow this? Why did she not see what was happening? Was she willfully blind, or was she manipulated by someone who was skilled at lying? The answer is probably more complicated than any single explanation can capture. Domestic situations involving abusers are rarely simple. Stephan had been in Jennifer's life for years, since Madeline was around 8 or 9 years old. He presented himself as helpful, caring, devoted. He may have been skilled at manipulating her perceptions, at convincing her that his need for closeness with Madeline was innocent. Or Jennifer may have simply chosen not to see what was right in front of her, because seeing it would have meant blowing up her life. Whatever the reasons, the result was catastrophic. Madeline spent years sleeping in the same bed as the man who was abusing her. She had no safe space in her own home. The adult who should have protected her instead handed her over, night after night, to a predator. And when that predator finally killed her, the opportunity to stop it had long since passed. One of the most revealing aspects of the Stephan Sterns case came from the audio and video recordings of his interrogations with law enforcement. Over the course of several interviews conducted in the hours and days after Madeline was reported missing, detectives tried to get Stephan to slip, to contradict himself, to reveal something that would break the case wide open. And while he never outright confessed, the recordings paint a picture of a man who was lying badly and knew it. In one early interview, conducted just after midnight on February 28th, two detectives sat down with Stephan to go over his timeline for the morning of the 26th. They were polite at first, almost conversational. They asked him to walk through his day step by step. Where did you go after dropping Madeline off? What time did you get to the smoke shop? What route did you take? Stephan's answers were vague and inconsistent. He said he dropped Madeline off at school around 8:30, maybe 8:40. He said he went to a vape shop after that, waited for it to open, realized it was closed, and left. But when detectives pointed out that surveillance footage showed him on John Young Parkway at 10 in the morning, he could not explain the gap. Over an hour of missing time. Over an hour when he claimed to be doing nothing in particular, going nowhere in particular. Can you help me explain to my supervisors why there's such a delay in the time? One detective asked. No, I can't explain it, Stephan said. I wasn't going anywhere in particular. I wasn't doing anything in particular. Just making my way to the smoke shop, waited for them to open. They did not open, and then I left. The detective pressed. But the smoke shop is only 10 to 15 minutes away. You're telling me it took you over an hour to get there and back." "Time is not a strong suit of mine," Stephan replied. "I understand, but I have to be able to explain where you were for an hour and 20 minutes. Does that make sense? And right now, I can't explain that." Stephan attributed the confusion to his ADHD. He said details got fuzzy. He said he did not have his phone with him, so he was not tracking time. He said the car he was driving was not his, so he did not pay attention to the clock. Every excuse was designed to make him seem scattered and forgetful rather than deceptive and guilty. But detectives were not buying it. They asked him about the flat tire he claimed to have dealt with on US 192. He could not remember where he stopped, what businesses were nearby, or any details about the area. When they asked why he was on that road in the first place, he said he wanted to check out a game card shop because there was a new trading card release. It was a nonsensical answer, the kind of detail someone throws out when they are trying to sound casual and normal, but have not thought through the logic. As the interviews continued, detectives began confronting Stephan with harder evidence. They told him about the surveillance footage. They told him his car was not where he said it was. They told him about the backpack in the dumpster, about the laptop, about the timeline that did not match his story. And with each new piece of evidence, Stephan's demeanor grew more strained. Then came the most damning moment. Detectives told him about the phone. They told him they had recovered files he thought were deleted. They asked him about the images, about the videos, about what he had been doing to Madeline. At that point, Stephan invoked his right to an attorney. The interview ended, and within hours he was arrested on 60 counts of child sex abuse. In a separate interview conducted on March 1st, the day Madeline's body was found, detectives spoke with Jennifer Soto at length. The audio from those conversations has been described as heartbreaking and infuriating in equal measure. Jennifer cried. She insisted she had no idea Stephan was hurting her daughter. She described Madeline as a sweet, anxious girl who loved school and friends and did not have any problems with anyone. She talked about how much she trusted Stephan, how integrated he had become in their lives, how impossible it seemed that he could have done something so evil. But when detectives asked her about the sleeping arrangements, about the nights she sent Madeline to bed with Stephan, her answers became defensive. She said Stephan needed someone to cuddle to fall asleep. She said Madeline did not seem uncomfortable with it. She said she never saw anything that made her think he was hurting her. She said she thought of Stephan as a father figure for her daughter. When investigators told Jennifer that the case had shifted to a homicide investigation and asked if she thought Stephan had killed Madeline, she reportedly went quiet for a moment before breaking down. "At this point, I do," she said. She also stated to detectives, according to supplemental reports, that she was aware, "He's been grooming and abusing my child." Investigators did not buy Jennifer's claim of complete ignorance. A father figure does not insist on sharing a bed with a child. A father figure does not disclose waking up with an erection next to that child. A father figure does not accumulate 1,500 images and videos of that child being abused. Jennifer's narrative required a level of willful blindness that detectives found almost as disturbing as Stephan's crimes. But without evidence that Jennifer had knowingly facilitated the abuse, without proof that she was aware of what was happening in real time and allowed it to continue, there was no legal basis to charge her. She remained free. Stephan remained in jail, and Madeline remained dead. Once Stephan was formally charged with Madeline's murder in April 2024, the case entered a new phase. The Ninth Judicial Circuit State Attorney's Office announced on June 10 that it would seek the death penalty, citing the premeditated nature of the crime, the vulnerability of the victim, and the years of abuse that preceded her death. It was a decision that carried enormous weight, both legally and emotionally. Death penalty cases are long, complicated, and expensive. They require years of pretrial motions, jury selection processes that can take weeks, and multiple rounds of appeals that stretch on for decades. For Madeline's family, the prospect of a death penalty trial meant years of reliving the worst moments of their lives in a courtroom. It meant seeing Stephan's face over and over. It meant hearing details of the abuse, the murder, the disposal of her body. It meant waiting endlessly for a resolution that might never feel like justice. Stephan's defense team mounted a series of challenges throughout 2024 and into 2025. They filed motions to suppress the evidence recovered from his phone, arguing that the search had violated his Fourth Amendment rights. They argued that seeking the death penalty was unconstitutional, invoking the Fifth, Sixth, Eighth, and 14th Amendments. They pushed for delays, for changes of venue, for anything that might give their client a better chance at avoiding execution. In April 2025, Stephan even took the stand himself during a hearing to suppress cell phone evidence, attempting to argue that the search of his device was improper. The judge ultimately ruled against him, determining that the state could use the phone evidence at trial. Prosecutors pushed back hard at every turn. They argued that the phone evidence was legally obtained, that Stephan had voluntarily turned the device over, and that the factory reset only strengthened the case for probable cause. They argued that the death penalty was justified given the heinous nature of the crime and the utter lack of remorse Stephan had shown. They presented timelines, surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and witness testimony that painted a picture of a calculated killer who had planned and executed the murder of a child. As the case dragged on through 2024 and into 2025, the legal wrangling became a second trauma for Madeline's loved ones. Her father, Tyler Wallace, attended hearing after hearing. Her stepmother sat in the gallery, staring at the man who had killed her stepdaughter. Friends and extended family members watched from the public seating area, hoping each new hearing would bring them closer to closure. Then, in early July 2025, something shifted. Behind closed doors, prosecutors and defense attorneys began negotiating a plea deal. The terms were stark. Stephan would plead no contest to first-degree murder and guilty to 20 of the most serious sex abuse charges. In exchange, the state would drop its pursuit of the death penalty. He would receive life in prison without the possibility of parole, and he would waive all rights to appeal. For Madeline's family, the decision to accept the plea was agonizing. On one hand, they wanted Stephan to face the ultimate punishment. They wanted him to sit in a cell for years knowing he was going to die, the way Madeline had died with no escape. On the other hand, they wanted the nightmare to end. They wanted to stop seeing his face. They wanted to stop hearing the details. They wanted some semblance of peace, even if peace was impossible. State Attorney Monique Worrell worked closely with the family to ensure they were comfortable with the plea. In a statement released after the sentencing, she emphasized that the decision had been made with the family's full support and that it ensured Stephan would never walk free again. For prosecutors, the plea also meant avoiding the risk of a trial. Juries are unpredictable. Appeals are endless. A guilty plea with no possibility of appeal was a guaranteed conviction. On July 21, 2025, in a courtroom in Osceola County, Florida, 39-year-old Stephan Sterns stood and accepted the terms. He pleaded no contest to murder. He pleaded guilty to 8 counts of capital sexual battery of a child under 12, 5 counts of sexual battery of a child aged 12 to 18, and 7 counts of lewd and lascivious molestation, 20 counts total. And Judge Keith Carson sentenced him to 21 concurrent life sentences without the possibility of parole. It was over, legally at least. For Madeline's family, it would never truly be over. The sentencing hearing on July 21, 2025, was one of the most emotionally charged courtroom proceedings Osceola County had seen in years. The gallery was packed with Madeline's family, friends, teachers, and members of the community who had followed the case since the day she disappeared. News cameras lined the back of the room. Reporters scribbled notes. And at the defense table, Stephan Sterns sat in an orange jumpsuit, flanked by his attorneys, staring straight ahead. Before the judge handed down the sentence, several people stood to give victim impact statements. These are moments designed to allow the people affected by a crime to speak directly to the defendant and the court, to put a human face on the statistics and legal language. For Madeline's loved ones, it was a chance to tell the world who she had been and what her loss meant. Her father, Tyler Wallace, spoke first. His voice cracked as he described his daughter. He talked about her smile, about the way she loved school and her friends, about the small things that made her unique. He talked about the hole her death had left in his life, about the birthdays she would never have, about the future she had been robbed of. He looked directly at Stephan as he spoke, and his words were searing. "I can't grasp the selfishness of you, the deplorability of your actions. You're depraved, weak, and a coward." Madeline's stepmother also spoke. She described the process of trying to explain to younger siblings why Madeline was not coming home. She talked about the nightmares, about the constant replaying of what-ifs, about the guilt that comes with not being able to protect a child you loved. She talked about how every milestone, graduations, weddings, holidays, would now be marked by Madeline's absence. Friends stood and shared memories. They talked about a girl who was kind and anxious and eager to do well. They talked about inside jokes and quiet moments, and the way her absence had turned ordinary places, bedrooms, hallways, school bleachers, into sites of constant ache. Roommates from the apartment complex where she lived described her as a quiet, sweet girl who did not deserve what happened to her. Each statement added another layer to the portrait of a life that had been full of potential and promise before it was violently cut short. Jennifer Soto did not speak. She did not attend the sentencing hearing. Her absence was noted by reporters and commented on extensively online. For many people, her failure to show up, her failure to read a victim impact statement, felt like a final betrayal. Madeline's mother, the woman who should have been her fiercest protector, was not there to watch her killer be sentenced. Whether that absence was out of shame, grief, or something else, it became another point of public anger and debate. When it was Stephan's turn to speak, he stood and delivered a brief apology. Reports from inside the courtroom described it as wooden and perfunctory, more a legal obligation than a genuine expression of remorse. He said, "I agree that it is not fair that Madeline is not here anymore. It's been a hard time contemplating a world where she's not around, a world that feels less vibrant, less colorful than it did before. I've prayed to God countless times to trade places with her and to take me instead. Unfortunately, that's just not how he works. I apologize for all the pain." The statement lasted about 90 seconds. For families listening, no words would have been enough. Judge Carson then addressed the court. He spoke about the severity of the crime, about the years of abuse that preceded the murder, about the calculated way Stephan had tried to cover his tracks. He noted that Madeline had been a vulnerable child, that she had trusted Stephan, that she had been failed by the very people who should have kept her safe. He emphasized that the sentence he was about to impose ensured that Stephan would never have the opportunity to hurt another child. Then he handed down the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder charge, plus life sentences for 20 of the sex abuse counts, all to run concurrently. In total, 21 life sentences, no parole, no appeals, no second chances. As deputies led Stephan out of the courtroom, Madeline's family wept. Some looked relieved. Others looked hollowed out, as if the weight of the last year and a half had finally caught up to them. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. State Attorney Worrell gave a brief statement emphasizing that justice had been served, that Stephan would die in prison, that Madeline's family could begin the long process of healing. But healing, for people who have lost someone to murder, is never a straight line. It is a process that takes years, maybe lifetimes. And for Madeline's family, the knowledge that her killer was behind bars did not erase the fact that she was gone. In the months following Stephan's sentencing, the case continued to generate public attention and debate. New details emerged as more documents were unsealed. Journalists wrote in-depth analyses of the investigation, the surveillance footage, the failures that allowed Madeline to be abused for so long. Advocates for child safety pointed to the case as a stark example of how predators operate within families and how easily warning signs can be ignored or rationalized. One of the most discussed aspects of the aftermath was Jennifer Soto's continued presence in the community. She had not been charged with any crime, but her role in the case had made her a controversial figure. Online forums and social media platforms were filled with debates about whether she should face legal consequences for allowing the sleeping arrangements, for ignoring the red flags, for failing to protect her daughter. Some argued she was a victim herself, manipulated by a skilled predator. Others argued she was complicit, that her negligence rose to the level of criminal responsibility. Law enforcement officials, including Kissimmee Police Chief Betty Holland, had hinted during the investigation that the case remained open and that additional charges could be filed if new evidence came to light. Everyone that was close to Madeline is considered suspect until we have proven otherwise, Holland said in March 2024. But as of January 2026, no additional charges have been filed. Jennifer remains free, living somewhere in Florida, reportedly cut off from much of Madeline's extended family. Madeline's case also prompted discussions about systemic failures. How had no one at school noticed signs of abuse? How had no mandatory reporters picked up on the fact that a 13-year-old was sharing a bed with her mother's adult boyfriend? Why had Jennifer's friends and family not intervened when they heard about the sleeping arrangements? These are uncomfortable questions without easy answers, but they are the questions that need to be asked if future Madelines are going to be protected. Child safety advocates have used the case as a teaching tool. They point to the grooming behavior Stephan exhibited, the insistence on physical closeness, the normalization of inappropriate boundaries, the slow erosion of a child's sense of safety. They emphasize the importance of listening to kids when they express discomfort, of taking seriously any adult's insistence on being alone with a child, of questioning sleeping arrangements that do not make sense. Madeline's story has also become a cautionary tale about the dangers of digital exploitation. The 1,500 images and videos Stephan accumulated represent not just individual acts of abuse, but a permanent record of that abuse. Even with Stephan in prison, those files exist somewhere in the digital ether, potentially accessible to others who trade in child essay material. It is a secondary violation, a theft of Madeline's dignity that extends beyond her death. In late July 2025, the Florida Department of Corrections released a new mugshot of Stephan Sterns. He looked slightly different from the photos taken at his initial arrest. His face was thinner, his expression more hardened, but his eyes were the same. The photos circulated online and people commented on how he was still relatively young, 39 years old, life in prison, no possibility of parole. He will spend the next 40, maybe 50 years behind bars, growing old in a cell, outliving his victim by decades. In October 2025, a judge officially designated Stephan Sterns as a sexual predator, and his information was added to Florida's online registry of sexual offenders and predators. It was yet another formal recognition of what everyone already knew. He was a danger to children, and he would remain locked away for the rest of his natural life. For Madeline's family, the mugshot and the registry listing were reminders that justice, such as it is, had been served. But they were also reminders of everything they had lost. Madeline would never grow old. She would never go to prom, never graduate high school, never fall in love or have children of her own. She would remain forever 13, frozen in birthday photos and school pictures, her entire future reduced to what might have been. Cases like the murder of Madeline Soto force us to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, family, and the ways predators operate. They remind us that evil does not always look like a stranger in a van. Sometimes it looks like a boyfriend. Sometimes it looks like a step-parent, a coach, a family friend. Sometimes it is the person sitting at the dinner table, the person you have invited into your home, the person you have trusted with your child. Stephan Sterns was not an outsider. He was not a mysterious figure lurking in the shadows. He was integrated into Madeline's daily life. He drove her to school. He attended her birthday party. He was, by all outward appearances, a normal man in a relationship with a single mother. And that ordinariness is precisely what makes cases like this so terrifying. Because if someone like Stephan can hide in plain sight, who else might be doing the same? Warning signs were there. An adult man insisting on sleeping with a child. An adult man disclosing inappropriate physical reactions to that child. A mother who rationalized those behaviors rather than stopping them. Friends and family who heard about the sleeping arrangements and did not intervene. Teachers and school staff who, based on what we know from public records, did not report concerns about the unusual living situation. Every one of those moments was an opportunity to save Madeline. And every one of those moments was missed or ignored. So what can be learned from this? How can future tragedies be prevented? The answers are not simple, but they start with vigilance. Parents need to question any adult who insists on being alone with their child, especially in private settings like bedrooms. They need to trust their instincts when something feels wrong, even if they cannot articulate why. They need to create environments where children feel safe disclosing abuse, where they know they will be believed and protected. Teachers, counselors, and other mandatory reporters need to be trained to recognize the signs of grooming and exploitation. They need to ask questions when a child's behavior changes, when a child seems anxious or withdrawn, when they learn about sleeping arrangements that raise red flags. They need to report their concerns, even when those concerns involve families they know and trust. Most investigators agree that in cases like Madeline's, there are often multiple touchpoints where intervention could have occurred if adults had been willing to ask harder questions. Communities need to stop treating child abuse as something that only happens in other families, in bad neighborhoods, in homes that look different from their own. Predators exist at every income level, in every neighborhood, in every demographic. They are skilled at presenting a normal facade. The only way to catch them is to look past that facade and pay attention to behaviors rather than appearances. And children need to be taught, from a young age, about bodily autonomy and consent. They need to know that no adult should be touching them in ways that make them uncomfortable, that they have the right to say no, that they can tell a trusted adult if something feels wrong. They need to know that secrets about touch are not okay, that they will not get in trouble for disclosing abuse, that the adults in their lives will protect them. Madeline did not have those protections. She was failed by the adults who should have kept her safe, and she paid for those failures with her life. The case also highlights the critical importance of digital forensics in modern investigations. Stephan's attempt to factory reset his phone was, in the end, what sealed his fate. The recovered images and videos provided irrefutable proof of years of abuse. They created a timeline that investigators could cross-reference with other evidence. They showed beyond any doubt that Madeline had been victimized in her own home by someone she was supposed to trust. But digital evidence cuts both ways. While it helped convict Stephan, it also means that images of Madeline's abuse exist somewhere in the digital ecosystem, potentially being traded and viewed by other predators. This is the nightmare that haunts families of SA victims. The knowledge that the violation never truly ends, that somewhere, someone might be looking at images that were never supposed to exist. Law enforcement agencies across the country have pointed to the Madeline Soto case as an example of why parents need to monitor their partners' interactions with children, why schools need robust reporting protocols, and why communities need to create cultures where speaking up is not just encouraged, but expected. Based on what we know from the investigation, this could have been prevented at multiple points if adults had been willing to prioritize a child's safety over their own comfort or convenience. The case has also sparked renewed discussions about whether parents who enable abuse through negligence should face criminal charges. While Jennifer Soto was never charged, many legal experts have debated whether her actions, or inactions, rose to the level of criminal culpability. Some states have laws that specifically address failure to protect, but Florida's statutes in this area are more limited. This could imply that future legislation might need to address situations where a parent's willful blindness creates an environment for sustained abuse. Madeline Soto was born on February 25, 2011. She died on February 26, 2024, one day after her 13th birthday. In between those two dates was a life full of small joys and ordinary moments that her family now clings to. She loved school, even though she struggled with anxiety. She was kind to her friends. She enjoyed spending time with family. She had dreams and plans and a whole future ahead of her. High school, college, careers, relationships, all the milestones that define a life. That future was stolen from her by someone she was supposed to trust. In the year following her death, Madeline was memorialized in her Hunters Creek Middle School yearbook. Friends wrote messages saying they missed her, that they would never forget her, that they wished they could have said goodbye. The yearbook included photos of her smiling, participating in school activities, being the kid she should have been allowed to remain. Teachers dedicated pages to her memory. Classmates drew hearts and wrote, "I miss you so much," next to her picture. The community held vigils and fundraisers in her name. Her face appeared on flyers and T-shirts and social media posts, a reminder that she mattered, that her life had value, that she should not be forgotten. Local advocacy groups used her story to push for better protections for children, for mandatory reporting training, for resources that help kids escape dangerous situations. But memories are not enough. Madeline deserved more than memories. She deserved to live. She deserved to be protected. She deserved a mother who put her safety above everything else and a justice system that intervened before it was too late. She did not get those things. And so she is gone, reduced to photographs and victim impact statements and a case file that will be studied by law students and true crime enthusiasts for years to come. Her father, Tyler Wallace, has said that he thinks about her every single day. He wonders what she would be doing now, what grade she would be in, what she would be interested in. She would be 14, almost 15 if she had lived. She would be in high school. She might have joined a sport or a club, might have had her first real crush, might have started thinking about what she wanted to do after graduation. He wonders and he grieves, and he tries to find meaning in a loss that has no meaning. For Tyler and his family, one of the hardest parts has been living with the knowledge that Madeline spent her final years in a situation they had limited ability to change. Custody arrangements, distance, and the realities of co-parenting meant that they could not be there every day to see what was happening. They trusted that Jennifer would protect their daughter. That trust was misplaced, and Madeline paid the price. Friends who attended that final birthday party on February 25th have spoken about the guilt they feel. They were there, in the same room as Stephan, laughing and eating cake, having no idea what was happening behind closed doors. Some have said they wish they had noticed something, wish they had asked Madeline if she was okay, wish they had done anything differently. But how could they have known? Predators are experts at hiding in plain sight, at appearing normal while committing unspeakable acts. Madeline's story has resonated far beyond Central Florida. It has been covered by national news outlets, true crime podcasts, and documentary series. Each retelling brings her case to a new audience, and with that audience comes the possibility that someone, somewhere, will recognize warning signs in their own life and act on them. That someone will see an inappropriate sleeping arrangement and speak up. That someone will notice a child's discomfort around an adult and investigate. That someone will save a life because they learned from Madeline's death. In online communities dedicated to discussing the case, people have shared their own stories of abuse, of being failed by adults who should have protected them, of surviving situations similar to what Madeline endured. Her case has become a rallying cry for survivors, a reminder that they are not alone and that their stories matter. It has also become a warning to parents: trust is not enough. You must verify. You must watch. You must be willing to believe the worst about someone you love if that is what protects your child. 1 year after her death, on February 26, 2025, a memorial gathering was held in her honor. Family, friends, and community members came together to light candles, share memories, and recommit themselves to protecting children. Tyler Wallace spoke about his daughter's legacy, about how her death had opened eyes and changed conversations. He said that while he would give anything to have her back, he hoped that her story would prevent other families from experiencing the same loss. The memorial also served as a moment to reflect on what had changed in the year since Madeline's murder. Schools in the area had implemented new training for staff on recognizing signs of abuse. Local law enforcement had increased outreach to parents about digital safety and monitoring children's relationships with adults. Advocacy groups had pushed for legislative changes that would strengthen protections for vulnerable children. But for all the policy changes and awareness campaigns, the fundamental truth remained. Madeline was gone. No amount of training or legislation could bring her back. The only thing her death could do was serve as a warning, a lesson written in the worst possible way. For everyone who followed this case, who watched the news conferences and read the court documents and waited for justice, Madeline's story is a reminder of what is at stake when we fail to protect children. It is a reminder that vigilance matters, that questions matter, that intervention matters. It is a reminder that the decisions we make, to speak up or stay silent, to investigate or ignore, to protect or look away, can mean the difference between a child who lives and a child who dies. Madeline did not get a second chance, but every time someone hears her story and decides to act differently, to look closer, to ask harder questions, another child might. That is the uncomfortable, necessary work this kind of tragedy demands. Not just consuming the details, not just shaking our heads at the horror of it all, but letting those details change how we see the world and the people in it. The surveillance footage that captured Stephan moving Madeline's body, the digital evidence that documented years of abuse, the police interviews where his lies fell apart, the sleeping arrangements that should have never been allowed, the birthday party that became her last. Every piece of this story is a lesson about how predators operate, how systems fail, and how ordinary people can miss or ignore signs that seem obvious in hindsight. Stephan Sterns will spend the rest of his life in a Florida prison. He will wake up every day in a cell, knowing that he murdered a 13-year-old girl who trusted him. He will grow old behind bars, watching decades pass, never experiencing freedom again. It is the closest thing to justice that the legal system can provide, but it is not enough. It will never be enough. Because justice for Madeline would have been prevention. Justice would have been adults who listened, who questioned, who intervened before it was too late. Justice would have been a mother who chose her daughter's safety over her relationship. Justice would have been a system that caught the warning signs and acted on them. Justice would have been Madeline alive, growing up, experiencing all the things that were stolen from her. Instead, we have a case study, a cautionary tale, a name that will be remembered alongside other children who were failed by the adults who should have protected them. And we have the burden of learning from her death, of carrying forward the lessons written in her loss. So if you take anything from Madeline's story, let it be this: believe children when they tell you something is wrong. Question adults who push boundaries. Do not rationalize behavior that makes you uncomfortable. Trust your instincts, even when it means disrupting relationships or causing conflict. And above all, remember that protection is not about being polite or avoiding awkward conversations. It is about being willing to disrupt, to confront, to intervene, even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. Madeline Soto deserved adults who would fight for her. She did not get them. But maybe, just maybe, her story can ensure that other children do. Maybe her death, as senseless and preventable as it was, can be the thing that makes one parent pay closer attention, one teacher ask one more question, one friend speak up instead of staying silent. Maybe somewhere, a child who is in danger right now will be saved because someone remembered Madeline's story and decided to act. That is not justice. Nothing can deliver justice for Madeline now, but it is something. It is the only thing we have left to offer her, the promise that her life and her death will mean something, that we will learn, that we will do better, that we will protect the children who are still here, the children who still have a chance. Thank you for staying with Madeline's story to the end. Her life mattered. Her death was preventable. And the lessons from this case are too important to ignore. If this story has changed the way you think about safety, boundaries, or trust, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Talk to your children about body autonomy. Question the adults in their lives who seem too interested in being alone with them. Create safe spaces for kids to disclose abuse without fear. And wherever you are listening from, take a moment to hold space for a 13-year-old girl who loved school and her friends and should still be here, growing up, making mistakes, living her life. She deserved that chance. We failed her. Let us not fail the next Madeline. Her name was Madeline Soto. She was 13 years old, and she should still be alive.